Dada emerged amid the brutality of World War I, a conflict that claimed the lives of 8 million military personnel and an estimated equal number of civilians. For the disillusioned artists of the Dada movement, the war merely confirmed the degradation of social structures that led to such violence. Corrupted nationalist politics, repressive social values, and unquestioning conformity of culture and thought. From 1916 until the mid-1920s, artists in Zurich, New York, Hanover, and Paris declared an all-out assault against not only on conventional definitions of art, but on rational thought itself. Dada was the first conceptual art movement where the focus of the artist was not on the craft being aesthetically pleasing, but on making works that often appended bourgeois sensibilities and that generated difficult questions about society, the role of the artist, and the purpose of art. Dada's aesthetic, marked by its mockery of materialistic and nationalistic attitudes, proved a powerful influence on artists in many cities, including Berlin, Hanover, Paris, New York, and Cologne, all of which generated their own groups. The movement faded out with the establishment of Surrealism, which primarily came out of the Dada movement by incorporating the element of surprise and unexpectedness. This eventually led to pop art in the late 1950s in America and most associated with the work of New York artists of the 1960s. Following the popularity of the abstract expressionists, pop's reintroduction of identifiable imagery drawn from mass media and popular culture was a major shift for the direction of modernism. The subject matter became far more traditional high art themes of morality, mythology, and classic history, but rather, pop artists celebrated commonplace objects and people of everyday life. In this way, the artist was seeking to elevate popular culture to the level of fine art. By creating art pieces of mass culture objects, the pop art movement aimed to blur the boundaries between high art and low art culture, implementing the idea that there is no hierarchy of culture and that art may borrow from any source has made pop art so influential. Owing to the incorporation of commercial images, pop art has become one of the most recognizable styles of modern art. One artist who has changed the course of history in particular is Marcel Duchamp. In his own words, "You cannot define electricity, the same can be said of art. It is a kind of inner current in a human being, or something which needs no definition." By challenging the very notion of what is art, Duchamp's first ready-mades sent shockwaves across the art world that can still be felt today. Coined by Duchamp himself, the term ready-made came to designate mass-produced everyday objects taken out of their usual context and promoted to the status of artworks by the mere choice of the artist. By signing them, Duchamp laid claim to found objects such as a snow shovel, a urinal, or bicycle wheels. These objects, tied symbolically to themes of desire, eroticism, and childhood memory, were designed to show the absurdity of canonizing avant-garde art practice. Duchamp favored more intellectual, concept-driven approaches to art making, and for that matter, viewing. Duchamp's insistence that art should be an expression of the mind rather than the eye or the hand spoke to minimalists and conceptual artists alike. His insistence that art should be driven by ideas above all, Duchamp is generally considered to be the father of conceptual art.
Bienvenidos, bienvenue,
Willkommen and benvenuto.
Please follow me as I take us all on a journey of Duchamp and the artists they follow and how they reject the classical art traditions. In this first exhibit, what we will see is Duchamp's ready-mades, which you rather can say started the entire presentation. Did they not, Fogg? He concurs.
Ready-mades, as he called them, disrupted centuries of thinking about the artist's role as a skilled creator of original handmade objects. Instead, Duchamp argued, an ordinary object could be elevated to the dignity of a work of art by the mere choice of an artiste. The ready-made also defied the notion that art must be beautiful. Duchamp claimed to have chosen everyday objects based on a reaction of visual indifference, with at the same time a total absence of good or bad taste. In doing so, Duchamp paved the way for conceptual art, work that was in the service of the mind as opposed to purely retinal art, intended only to please the eye.
Hello again. Now, I'm going to go a little more into detail on some of his ready-mades. The fountain. What you can say started it all. This is one of his most iconic and famous pieces, and some even argue one of the most iconic art pieces of the 20th century. So essentially the fountain is merely a urinal from a New York sanitation company flipped on its back. Now what he was saying with this piece is what he initially was saying with all ready-mades, which is what is art, what is sculpture, what is creativity. This to him is art as much as Rodin's sculptures were to him and his workshop. This was Marcel Duchamp's way of having a workshop and workers beneath him, was merely just buying ready-mades. This piece really was provocative and started a lot of conversation within the art world as to what art was, and the fountain has been seen in many other forms. Duchamp, while the original one was destroyed, he recreated multiple versions, such as the version that many of you are familiar with is the second version. In addition, Duchamp had more. Not only did he have the fountain, which was rather the prelude, but he had plenty of other ready-mades that served to the same exact purpose as the fountain. The idea behind it was sculpture. What is art? What is art to you? What is art to him as an artist? Again, bringing back to the idea that it's the artist who makes the art, not the art who makes the artist. So here we have Hat Rack. Here we have Prelude to Broken Arm. Here we have Trap. Here we have Traveler's Folding Item. Here we have The Window. Here we have 50 cc of Paris air, actually filled with genuine air from Paris. And then we have The Brawl at Austerlitz. Bicycle Wheel. Bottle Rack. Rotary Demisphere. Rotary Glass Plates. And then, my personal favorite, LHOOQ.
One.
So this piece is LHOOQ, or in French,
LHOOQ.
and essentially, what this translates to is, she has a hot ass. So what Duchamp was trying to do throughout this picture was use a ready-made. So originally, this piece was a postcard in which Duchamp had merely doodled a mustache and a goatee on the Mona Lisa, made by Leonardo da Vinci. This piece, again, like most ready-mades, was questioning what is art, what is it to you, what is it to me, but it also had a little bit of a different twist to it. Now, Duchamp was a man who definitely experimented with being transgender, the idea of androgyny, the idea of homosexuality in a time where that was largely suppressed. And so this kind of plays with that idea. So what we have here is the Mona Lisa with masculine features. The masculine features, through the mustache and the goatee, attributed to Leonardo da Vinci's suspected homosexuality, as well as Duchamp is gesturing to the androgynous nature of creativity. Creativity is not male or female, but there's so much more to it than just the relationship between the art and the artist, but also the viewer. And so it's kind of supposed to poke fun, kind of shove it in your face, but also bring it all back to the idea that we no longer live in a time of classical art, but rather in a time where art should say something, not just be something. So, after Duchamp, we experienced a period of artists testing their boundaries. In the 30s, we saw artists such as Picasso and Marat Oppenheim and many others who all did something different and new and we never seen before. Now, following World War I, entering into World War II, became a time of surrealism, when it wasn't the rational mind thinking, but rather the cerebral mind thinking and painting and sculpting. And so one day at lunch, Oppenheim was with her fellow artists Dora Maar and Pablo Picasso, and it came to the subject of her fur-covered bracelet and what it meant. And she said anything can be covered in fur in reality, even her teacup and her saucer. Thus, the birth of the object. The object by Marat Oppenheim is a teacup, saucer, and teaspoon covered in fur. Now, this piece is supposed to give you mixed signals. You know, the fur alludes to nature and animals in the wilderness, while the teacup and the saucer allude to manners and civil society. Marat was one of the women who, at the time, would have been oppressed by male critics. And so she did very different and bold things in order to kind of stand out. And even at her own solo exhibit for the first time, when this piece was actually debuted, critics would call her Mr. Oppenheim. So she had a very unique experience in the art world and in surrealism. And following surrealism, we move into a genre most closely related to Duchamp, and that is pop art. Pop art was created in the 1960s and 50s. One of the most predominant artists being Andy Warhol. Pop art was again kind of questioning consumerism and what it is to be art. More closely related to Duchamp and how he questioned, this is a ready-made, my ready-mades are just as good as anyone else's sculpture because it's the artist who makes the art. And Andy Warhol rather commented on America's consumerism, the rampant consumerism, and how we just would kind of dehumanize things around us and people around us. So in the Maryland Diptych by Andy Warhol, that's kind of what it's showing. It's showing how we took a star who was a real person and we turned her into a symbol. We turned her into a sex symbol, a symbol to sell things. And this kind of shows that. So we have the super colorful and bright side, and then it slowly fades into pretty much nothing. And what this is showing is the starting of her lustful career and her being a bright Hollywood starlet, and then how she slowly faded and diminished into nothing when she died, because it kind of broke her as a society. Between us being super materialistic and super into the idea of her rather than of her as a person, which kind of goes along with the idea of what Warhol was trying to do through mass production and commenting on America's rampant consumerism. It's not about the art. It's not about how this was made. It's about what it's saying. So he's not giving you a piece to hang up on your wall and say, oh, look how pretty the colors. It's a piece to look at and say, wow, look at what we're doing, people. We're dehumanizing people. They're not doing it to themselves, we're doing it to them. So it's kind of a weird thought to kind of comprehend, but a very powerful thought, and one that was pretty popular amongst that kind of genre of artists. Warhol was also very interested in the idea of his art being a consumer product to buy, the idea of ready-mades. His workshop is actually called The Factory. So he would pretty much have people working under him. He would have the idea for the work, but then people would make the work for him. So it was kind of like a basic factory you see in any old part of America. People working under a boss and creating something to be bought and to be sold. And you could even say that, Marilyn Monroe was someone created to be bought, to be sold. So it kind of transcends a lot of arguments, what Warhol was trying to do. Then after Warhol, we get a period of a lot more war and a lot more uncertainty with humanity. And then going to this idea of insane sculpture and just furthering ourselves and furthering the modern society from classical art and the traditions of art, which is to escape and to see something pretty. Art really, from the 70s onward, is just making comments on society. And such can be seen in Lipstick, Ascending on Caterpillar Tracks by Oldenburg. This was installed in front of one of the admin offices of Yale. And pretty much what it is caterpillar tracks, like what you would see on a tank, and then a giant lipstick. This was to allude to a couple different things, actually. The lipstick was supposed to be a phallic symbol, so the idea of make love, not war. But then it was also supposed to make a mark on America's materialism and how we had become so much more concerned with makeup and buying things to make ourselves pretty than the fact that thousands and thousands and thousands are being slaughtered over in Vietnam as this piece was being made. And then the caterpillar tracks, again, they go along with the idea of the war. And so this piece is kind of crazy. It would be put at the rally site, and it was actually a podium to speak on. So it was a super functional piece as well as a powerful piece. So that was really cool. And then we go to something a little more different. We go to something known as performance art. Kusama was really popular for this, and she's just really out there. And she really makes you think about different things and different ways to view people and humanity. And this one, in Narcissus Garden, she presented it for the bicentennial in New York, and pretty much what she would do is she'd have this is a little different picture than what it would have happened, but she would have these all lined up in like a kind of a square, and she would pick them up and she'd sell them to viewers. And she'd pretty much say, buy your own narcissism. So these orbs are pretty basic. I mean, they're kind of large scale, but pretty basic orbs that you can get anywhere. You can probably go to Z Gallery and find some just like this. But so again, the idea of kind of almost the ready-made, and the idea that she's not selling art, but she's selling an idea. So she's handing people their own narcissism. People are essentially buying a mirror. They're buying their own vanity. Again, commenting on consumerism, society, and people criticize her saying this isn't art. But she kind of, made a claim, what's to say what is art and what isn't art. Kind of going back again to Duchamp. What is art and what isn't art? Art isn't just, pretty sculptures. It's not just Caravaggio, Michelangelo, and technique. It's so much more now. Art has to make a comment on society. It has to do something to really be powerful in modern days. And then we go to Judy Chicago, who was a super interesting artist. Judy Chicago was very concerned with the feminist movement and how women were viewed and how to pretty much crush the patriarchy. That was her main goal. She even changed her last name from her given name because she thought her given last name was enforced upon her by the male-dominated society. And so Judy Chicago created the dinner table. The dinner table consists of 3 sides. It's an equilateral triangle. The equilateral triangle was alluding to the fight for equality that women were facing. And then on each side are 13 dishes. On each dish is an abstracted vagina. And her goal through this was obviously to try and, show women's history. Show how throughout the times life changed for women. And also by having this piece, it wasn't necessarily to comment on the beauty of the sculpture, but rather to comment on women in an abstracted way. It also was alluded to The Last Supper, which was a piece dominated by males, and she turned it into a piece dominated by females this time around. And now we move into the global contemporary, really new art, 2000s to now, pretty much. And what we see with this 2000s art is actually rather a turn back to traditional art stylings, but making fun and using them to kind of poke at the audaciousness of, classism and all those ideas kind of centering around having multiple classes and multiple races and the ethnicities and how that's all interplayed into modern day America, but also modern day Europe, Africa, Asia, etc. And how these old past ideas are kind of mingling back into modern times and So, Shannabare uses the swing. This is the swing after Fragonard. And what he's commenting in this is he's showing a piece from a time in France when it was just the wealthy were so far beyond wealthy. They were kind of in a completely different level. They did whatever they wanted to, no matter what was going on in the world at the time. They spent their money, they had fun, they didn't really have a concept of what problems were, or what the poorer class was going through at the time. And so what he does is he actually uses traditional African textiles. I don't know if you can see if you zoom in a little bit. These textiles are very colorful, they're bright, not what would have been used, but he sculpts them in a way traditional to what was worn back at that time in France. And so essentially what he's commenting through this picture is he's bringing up the audacity of those French classes at the time, while also intermixing the audacity of the class system today in America and in Europe and in the world in general, and how we still put people below other people. That the idea hasn't changed. I think Shannabare is a very modern artist, Kehinde Wiley, and he was really concerned with bringing random people off the streets and putting them in a painting that kind of raised their status. Raised their status to the level of classical painting almost, and that kind of reverence in a way they had never really been raised to that level before. And in Napoleon leading the army over the Alps, what he did was he took a random African-American male off of the streets of New York, told him to come in his work clothes or his street clothes, and Kehinde pretty much painted him how Napoleon had been painted. And his technique is stunning. I mean, Kehinde is definitely a classically trained painter. Very beautiful painting. Has really good use of shading. It's pretty realistic in the horse, and and the way he's painting attributes to the exact time period when Napoleon's portrait was painted for this same version of the painting. And so what he's kind of doing here is he's raising this man who's dressed in his street clothes. If you zoom in on the lower part, you can actually see his boots. That's a very modern work boot, even used today in modern fashion. It just shows the modern setting with the classical reverence. So the modern painters very much appreciated classical art and the beauty and the talent that it took to make this. And they used it in a way that could create reverence for modern day people and your average day Joe who just came off the street, and put them in a way that made them Napoleon. It showed them as a really grand conqueror or a leader, and most of them had never really seen themselves as that before, or had ever been even momentarily congratulated or put on a pedestal like that. And so Kehinde really does something quite impressive within his society. Really not so much about the art, but rather the person behind the art, and the idea of making these oppressed minorities better in the eye of society, because they have no reason to be oppressed other than what society has put them there as. And Kehinde's kind of making that argument. And so he was really just making these people viewed in a way that the person they're being attributed to would have been viewed back in their day. So while Napoleon wasn't a good man at all, he was a powerful leader, and people did look up to him, they followed him, and he was well respected. And by putting this average man in a painting like this, it has a lot of weight, and it holds weight, kind of showing that this man looks like a leader. He looks like someone that should be respected, and someone that has every qualification, just as any other man, any other leader. So essentially, that's it for our exhibit right now, but for a nice little recap, all these modern paintings weren't necessarily directly related to Duchamp. It wasn't like they all used ready-mades or they all used urinals and made a statement. It's more about the idea that they took art and they made it their own. They didn't adhere to standards or salon requirements or their
patrons' wishes. They took it and they created what they wanted to create, but it was about what it was saying. You know, for instance, an orb given to you off a street by Kusama isn't, some great painting by Caravaggio. Of course not. It's not even a masterpiece. But it's what it was saying. It was saying, buy your own vanity. Or what, Oldenburg was saying, how we shouldn't, stop war. We shouldn't be focused on these materialistic, objects such as lipstick when there's people being slaughtered abroad. Or what Warhol was saying, how here we are as humans dehumanizing other people and putting a starlet, Marilyn Monroe, in a place where she was an object. She wasn't even a human anymore. And the catalyst for this entire argument honestly could be argued back to Duchamp. Duchamp was a man who created a new place for art, a new world for art. Dada just stripped everything we thought of art and built it up again. And it went from Dada to surrealism and cubism and futurism to pop art to contemporary global, and it's insane. It was insane the transition that was made, and it largely kind of was spurred by Duchamp and someone who was just so out there and so okay with himself and just so ready to just stop the classism that was existing in the art world, not even in normal day society, but this idea that art has to be beautiful, that art has to be, perfect. Art isn't supposed to be, normative. It's supposed to be different. It's supposed to say something nowadays, and it does. Art says things that people themselves will never be able to say. Art can be understood from all aspects of humanity and all parts of humanity. And we really have to thank those early creators who were brave enough to kind of reject the classical standards and the classical traditions of art. After World War I, it was a new world. And with a new world came new art.
The rejection of classical art represents an evolving set of ideas among artists who both individually and collectively sought new approaches to art and art making. Such artist creativity responds to the rationalist practices and perspectives of new lives and ideas provided by the technological advances of the industrial world that caused society to manifest itself in new ways compared to the past.